Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mystery Theory podcast. If you are listening to today's case on your favorite podcast, welcome. Thank you for coming back. And if you're watching the replay or listening to the replay on YouTube, thank you so much for also tuning in for a different kind of video on my YouTube channel. It's also true crime related, but due to the nature of my YouTube channel, I find that there's like an audience for, your typical ASMR true crime case, and there is also a different audience that enjoy my Wednesday uploads there too. So whoever you are, thank you so much for your support. Now, today's case, I've mentioned yesterday in my upload that I was kind of wrapping up my research, and it's a case that takes us all the way up to Canada. It involves mental illness, really a tragedy of an entire family, and the consequences not only for the victims and the family, but also the perpetrator. And it covers something that for some people might be a trigger. So if you find mental illness, true crime cases, or even, family murders kind of upsetting to you, then this would be the best time to exit this video or podcast. But for the rest of you who come here because you're curious about these cases, this is a very wild one. Now, some of you probably heard about Victor Hoffman. I certainly didn't, but I was talking to somebody yesterday and I'm like, how can you not know that name? And I felt kind of bad, but I guess that there are worse things to be ashamed of, I guess. But Victor Hoffman was a very different kind of boy. He started hearing voices since he was a little boy and hallucinating very vividly. He often would describe these visions as visits from angels and sometimes even the devil. And it is believed that he always had these visions, but that he started to talk about them by the age of 6. By the age of 10, he shared his need to kill something. So things were escalating, and his parents were very worried about him. But I think he was born in 1946, so when he was 6 years old, 52 or so? So in the early 50s, mental health was not a popular topic, and it was kind of a taboo kind of thing. So I assumed that they looked for help, but whatever was available for them at the time. Now, he, because of his diagnosis, he was having to go to mental hospitals, and at the time maybe they were not so into therapy, and I'm sure they had some kind of therapy, but they were trying different methods at the time. So he was in and out of mental hospitals, and that was hard, not only for him, but also for the parents. every time he would go to these mental institutions, he would come back very different for a while anyways. I don't think it was the treatment working, but I think it was the strong medicine that was really debilitating him. So much so that doctors would send him back home with his parents when he was in this kind of drugged and calm kind of state, assuming that the parents would be able to keep him under control. Again, he was in and out of different mental hospitals, and by the age of 21, he was being treated with electric shocks and some experimental treatments combined with drugs. And once again, once he was really worked up in his drugs, they sent him home with his parents. What Victor didn't share at that point is that some of the episodes he was experiencing now were a lot worse, and that he was having violent fantasies and he was planning or plotting murders, and nobody in particular really, anybody, but he also knew that he was going to be pointed to the right person by the voices, of course. So on August 15th, 1967, Victor left his parents' house and started to drive around a rural area. He noticed a small farmhouse. It was a white house, and it was in the distance. And he suddenly heard a voice that said, "Stop the car and go there." Now, this home was located near Shell Lake, which is located 150 kilometers north of Saskatoon, probably butchering that. But he was not familiar with the area, with the house, or the people who were living in it. He just was driving by and was waiting for the voices to tell him, "This is it." So he got out of the car and went to the house. He took a rifle with him and started to look around, looking for the family that lived there. He found the father, James Peterson, who was 47 years old. He was also a war veteran, and they struggled for a little bit. But in the end, Victor shot him 11 times, killing him almost immediately. Then Victor found the mom, Evelyn, who was 42 years old, and who jumped out the window with her 1-year-old baby Larry. I assume that this was in desperation, but he killed them both. And inside the house, there were 7 more kids. Jean, who was 17, Mary, who was 13, Dorothy, who was 11, Pearl, who was 9, William was 5, and Colin, who was 2. And remember, Larry was the one who was 1-year-old, and he was with his mom. All the kids were shot at close range while sleeping, or pretending to be, I assume, because one of the things that a lot of people say, and it makes sense, like in the Amityville case, it's like, okay, you can ignore maybe one shot, but I think in the end, this guy, I don't know, it was 11. He shot the guy 11 times. So I'm assuming that there was, some indication that something was going on in the house. But being kids, I don't know how much they assumed or how awake they were. But one of them, Phyllis, survived. I didn't mention her. She was a 4-year-old, and she was the only survivor. She actually hid between her two sisters who were deceased under the covers. She later on said that she heard her dad fighting with somebody, but she believes that she probably blocked the shots and the screaming and the commotion, I guess, because she can't remember them. And we do know that the attack was brutal, so it was not a quiet thing. The gruesome scene was discovered by Wildrew Lang, who helped around the farm. Just go and help with chores and stuff like that. I don't think it was an employee, but I think that, he was just going to help. And once he got there, he found the entire family dead. To make things worse, he had to go 3.7 miles to the next phone available to report it to the police. So it was not an easy task either to report it. Now, later on, Phyllis said that she still remembered that when she was picked up from the room where she was and kind of laying between her dead sisters, that the officer just couldn't hold it and kind of hugged her and was crying because it was so traumatizing. And Phyllis looked so, good. I mean, she looked okay, that it was so hard to believe that she was there and she was alive. Now, the Petersons had an older daughter. Her name was Kathy, and she got married before all this happened, and I think she was 19 or 20 years old, and she moved with her husband to British Columbia. So she was not at the house, but was notified of what happened, and she decided to move to the family farm and help raise her 4-year-old sister, Phyllis. Now, this girl, she's a superhero, I guess, because I don't know how somebody can live in a house where you know that your entire family was murdered at. But I understand, I'll talk about why they stayed in a little bit, but I think it takes a lot mentally to stay in a place like that. But anyways, the police, I'm not sure how they knew, but they knew who did this. So they went straight to Victor's house, which was 65 miles southeast of the farm. And once they got there, he was not hiding. Remember that he is mentally ill. And he started explaining to the police that he was fighting the devil. He described the devil as a black, tall man with no genitals. And when the police asked him, after he was arrested, why he spared Phyllis, sometimes he would say, like, her face looked like an angel, and that's why I spared her life. And then some other times he'd say something like, I'm not even sure why I spared her. Which maybe she did hide, good enough for a 4-year-old, and the guy didn't notice that she was alive, which is a strong possibility. But again, he just couldn't even say why he spared her. Victor was reevaluated and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and was declared insane and sent to a mental institution in southern Ontario. I was reading this statement by one of the experts and, who was treating him at the time or evaluating, and he described Victor as the craziest man in Saskatchewan. Probably butchering that too. But, this is so crazy because even after saying that and knowing how dangerous this guy is, in the year 2001, he was granted, this is like some kind of a permission that he got that granted escorted passes from the hospital that drove the Petersons completely crazy. Because it's unbelievable that after doing what this guy did and knowing how mentally ill he really is and dangerous, how they decided that it was okay to let him go, out even for the day. As he was being treated, he still had no remorse and still said that he was fighting the devil. Now, the family stayed, which is something I wanted to mention, is the family stayed around Shell Lake, and I'm talking about Kathy, her husband, and Phyllis, because, and this is something, again, that it kind of doesn't make sense, but it does at the same time because of how tragic the family murders were. But at the same time, Kathy felt like the family that they had in town and around was the kind of support that the girls needed at the time. They lived there for the longest time, and once they were ready to kind of retire from farm life, they moved closer to town, but still in the Shell Lake area. Now, the house ended up burning down and, kind of moved on from it. The family did. And Phyllis, which was the 4-year-old girl, later on said in an interview that was the best decision that they ever made, or at least Kathy made at the time, because they really needed the support from the neighbors and the community and the family in town. And that even though this was a rural area where, gossip is very common, but she felt kind of shielded from the outside world, who saw her as a celebrity, or a celebrity that survived. They kill your entire family, you survive, then all of a sudden everyone wants to talk to you, everyone wants to interview you. And she said that at Shell Lake, she's just a preschool teacher, that lived there her entire life. So she feels the connection with the place that really saw her entire family getting murdered, which is a contradiction, which is a terrible thing. But I mean, it kind of shows that depends on you, that people grieve in different ways. And sometimes things that I think would be really hard for me to do, like what Kathy did and staying at the house, it's for other person, still grieving, still being sad about the situation, still being scarred by the whole thing. That it still that we all deal with grief in a different way. Now, in the year 2004, so soon after that permission that he got of getting out, Victor died of cancer. So he didn't have that much time outside the mental institution. But I think we can all agree, and even the Peterson said in an interview, that the system not only failed this family by not taking care of somebody with a mental illness that was dangerous, because that is not to say that everyone with a mental illness should be, monitored closely or, drugged in the way that this guy was. But what he had in, the violent episodes and the psychotic episodes that he was experiencing, it was a sign that he was a dangerous man. So it was not about his mental illness per se, but because of the way that he dealt with it and how the system was too busy to kind of cater to somebody who was that dangerous. Schizophrenia is something that a lot of people suffer from, but it doesn't have to make you into a violent person. And I think in some cases it's easy to spot by a professional when somebody is being violent. I used to work for this lady who had, I think her son was like in his 30s, and he lived in the basement, and I knew that, like, sometimes she'd be like, oh, we're not working today, we're not doing this today, because he's having a moment. So I think as a family member, it's easy to read the signs when you were born this way, or when you have to deal with somebody from a young age with this mental illness. So how much more would a professional be able to tell if what Victor had was something dangerous to society, or if he was a danger to himself or even his family? Now, again, it kind of shows how the system, it's not perfect, and once it fails the person dealing with the mental illness, it is failing his family, it is failing the people that they hurt, if they do end up hurting somebody. So it's a connection, and everything is truly connected in everyday life, and so much more when there is some kind of a mental illness that is as noticeable as what Victor had and was experiencing at the time. So it's one of those sad cases that you wonder, why that house? Why did he go to that rural area? Why did he pick that house? How did he manage to kill so many people? It's so many shots fired. Did he have ammunition with him? There's so many questions and so many things that could have gone wrong for him and his plan to do what he did to this family, yet everything fell into place for him and ended up in a horrible tragedy. Now, I am glad that, Phyllis had Kathy, in that, she had somebody who was there for her as a older sister, as a mother, as a, that strong presence that, a little girl needs, especially after that amount of violence and, experience overall that she had. So, such a tragic case, such a sad story, and, something that hopefully, little by little, we start to study more, we start to research more, and come up with solutions and come up with the best way to help people experiencing this and protecting others that really have no idea that out of nowhere a monster can show up at your house in the middle of a typical morning and end up killing your entire family. So, thank you so much for being here today. I truly appreciate your support. If you're watching this on YouTube and you'd like to share your thoughts, please do in the comments down below. For those of you on the app, thank you so much for staying until the end, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye, guys.